All right, folks, how's it going? So today I'm going to be talking about the light reactions in photosynthesis, and we're going to be referencing the drawing that I asked you to do over the weekend. So this is what I asked you to draw and sort of think about how light is coming in, hitting the photosystems, and then we're going to generate two different types of energy here. One will be in the form of NADPH, and the other form will be in the form of ATP, which then are used to conduct the synthesis part of Calvin's cycle, which is where we're going to make the sugar molecule. So let's go ahead and walk through this. I'm going to kind of draw the same thing you guys were asked to draw over the weekend. So we're going to start by going ahead. We'll draw kind of something similar to that image. We'll sort of stick with that theme. So this is a thylakoid, and out here is the stroma, and this would be the thylakoid. We'll just abbreviate it, thylakoid, okay? All right, so we're going to start off by talking about a photosystem. My next video will have a little bit more detail about a photosystem, but for now, we're just going to draw this big complex inside is sort of embedded in the membrane, and that's what this is, the thylakoid membrane. Again, we're just sort of depicting this image here. All right, so here we have a photosystem. Oddly enough, this is called photosystem, I'm just going to abbreviate, photosystem 2. Now, photosystem 2 is the first photosystem in the photosynthesis sort of process. It's named photosystem 2 even though it is the first one in the process because of the order in which they were identified. So if you look over here at your image, here's photosystem 1, here's photosystem 2. Oddly enough, photosystem 2 comes first in the process, but photosystem 1 was actually identified before photosystem 2, so it was named first, right? It was special in that regard. But you just have to kind of flip-flop them in your mind as far as which one came first. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to start off by talking about some sunlight. We need that to start things off. So here comes our sunlight, and what the sunlight's going to do is it will go ahead and it will hit the photosystem, and in particular it will hit some of those different pigment molecules, and it will excite those electrons to a higher energy state. And we talked a little bit about that in lecture. What's important here, and we'll talk a little bit more detail about photosystems later, but what's important here is that to understand that the high energy electron, right here, it's now at a higher energy state. And what happens is now that higher energy state electron gets passed along to something you're kind of familiar with now, and that is an electron transport chain. So electron transport chain is going to be the recipient of that high energy electron. There are just a few molecules you need to know. One is called plastoquinone. I'll write them over here. Plastoquinone. Okay. And what it's going to do is it's going to receive that electron, and then it's going to pass it on to you can see it right here, the cytochrome complex. And that's a big complex right here. I'm just going to write CC, cytochrome complex. And again, that's right here. Okay, so here, we're following this image too. Light hits it, excites that electron to a higher energy state, and then we're going to go ahead and pass along this electron to plastoquinone and then cytochrome complex. Finally, it gets handed off to plastocyanin. So plastocyanin. All right? And then ultimately that plastocyanin will hand it to another complex, and that is called photosystem 1. Now here's the cool thing about photosystem 1. We're going to involve more sunlight. So I'll come back to that in a second, but there's some other stuff going on with the electron transport that we should address. All right, so let's back way up. So we've just basically followed sunlight smacking that photosystem 2, elevating the electron to a higher energy state, and that electron gets passed along. Okay, let me continue and draw where it's going. There we go. Okay, the electron goes all the way along. And as it does, it's going to lose energy. That energy will be lost. Now, it's not lost in that it's gone. It's going to be transformed into other things. All right, so let's look at what it's actually sort of transformed into. One is, of course, the H plus ions. It's just like what we saw before. What's happening here are the hydrogen ions are getting pumped across through that electron transport chain into the thylakoid space. So guess what? We're going to have lots of that H plus build up in here. And that's important. We're going to come back to that in just 1 second. All right, the other thing is over here, in this process, we have something else that happens, and it's really remarkable. It's why water is so important for this. What happens here is that we're going to pull the electrons from this whole system right here. So what we're going to end up with is oxygen being released and H pluses also being released. We call this a splitting of water. So we're going to split the water. So we get H pluses here, and we get O2. Guess where that electron went? Oh, right here. Okay, there we go. Pretty cool, huh? So the electron is now going to be donated to that photosystem 2. The sunlight then will excite that to a higher energy state, and off the electron goes. Okay, so now let's come back to our H pluses because we're going to try and make some ATP here. So here we have all these H pluses. They're coming about in 2 mechanisms. One is the splitting of water, and the other is the sort of pumping of the hydrogens across the membrane from that electron transport chain. All right. Okay, so now we have all this high concentration of H plus in here. Guess what we're going to do? We're going to generate ATP with that old friend of ours, ATP synthase. So ATP synthase, I'm going to abbreviate. There we go. Guess what's going to happen now? We get all those H pluses pumping out of there. Off they go. And there they go. Pretty cool. Now, when we do that, we're going to generate ATP. ATP from ADP plus phosphate group. We've seen this before, so I'm not really going to belabor it too much, but just understand now what's happened here, right? We have light hitting our photosystem 2, elevating that electron. That electron goes to a higher energy state where its energy is then transformed ultimately into this hydrogen being pumped across. Ultimately, now follow that electron. That electron goes all the way through plastocyanin into photosystem 1. All right, now we need a little bit more sunlight. Let's go back and get some more sunlight here, and we'll see what's going to happen next. So now we're gonna notice that as that electron goes across, the energy is kind of being lost from it. So here the sunlight goes from sunlight into electron into hydrogens. Now that electron is kind of at a lower energy state again. So guess what? We're going to have sunlight hit again. We're going to get a little more sort of a boost to our power, and we're going to be able to generate a little bit more energy. So here's photosystem 1 now. We have sunlight hitting that. We again elevate an electron to a higher energy state. And now what we're going to do is we're going to pass that electron to a molecule called ferredoxin. There we are, ferredoxin. Okay, ferredoxin. And then finally, that's not quite the last step here. We're going to pass that to something called NADP reductase. I'll just abbreviate it. Reductase. That's right here. NADP reductase. Guess what it's going to do? It's going to reduce NADP. So the way we do that is we're going to come over here and we're going to draw another little arrow type thing here. And we're going to say NADP plus. And then what are we going to make? NADPH. All right. So now guess what? We have 2 bits of energy. We have our ATP that we generate, and we have NADPH, and they're slightly different, so we'll mention that. ATP has the energy in the phosphate groups, right? The NADPH has the energy from the electron here. Where did it originally get that? Over here from the water. Okay, so now who cares? What's going to happen next? Well, what's going to happen next is the ATP and NADPH are going to be used in the Calvin cycle to make sugar. Cycle. There we go. To make sugar. Sugar. Okay. All right. There we go. Okay. Finally. Okay. So let's review just briefly those participants. All right. So let's follow the electron all the way through, and then we'll end over here with the hydrogens. So we have photosystem 2. Photosystem 2 will receive an electron from the splitting of water. Once that happens, we get an excitation of that electron to a higher energy state from the sunlight. Then that electron is passed to plastoquinone, where it's then passed to the cytochrome complex, which will enable us to pump hydrogens into that thylakoid space. The cytochrome complex passes its electron to plastocyanin, which then passes that electron to photosystem 1. Okay, now we get sort of a re-excitation, another excitation from sunlight, another boost, and now that energy is higher. So that electron then gets transferred into ferredoxin, where ferredoxin will pass it to an enzyme called NADP reductase. NADP reductase is going to then give us NADPH. Excellent. NADPH, we see that here. Next up, we're going to come back and revisit all those hydrogens that we pumped across. So again, we have that high concentration here. That high concentration is indeed energy, which will then be pumped back across, which will enable us to then transform the energy from high concentration to a kinetic energy, ultimately to an ATP energy. All right, there's a lot to cover in a short amount of time. I hope this helps, and we'll go over it one more time in class. And thank you very much. I'll see you in class. Bye.